3,000 meters underwater, the camera catches a golden glint, and a man wearing headphones says out loud, "This looks like the beginning of a horror movie." In the nets of a Japanese trawler hangs something the sailors take for a living dinosaur. They take 5 photographs and throw it back into the ocean. At the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea lies a stone column weighing as much as 3 elephants. It was drilled all the way through, 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years before the first letter of the alphabet, and in a dusty drawer of an Athens museum, a greenish lump of bronze lay for 100 years, until one day it cracked and a gear flashed inside. A computer, 2,000 years old. None of this is fiction. All of it was brought up from the bottom by real people, divers, fishermen, scientists, and every discovery has either an explanation that sends a chill down your spine or a question that no one on the planet has ever managed to answer. So turn off the lights and make yourself comfortable, because now the sea is going to show you 7 things it very much did not want to give back to us. You are watching the Top Facts channel. I wish everyone an enjoyable viewing. The drilled monolith that sank 10,000 years ago. 60 kilometers south of Sicily, an underwater shoal rises from the depths, Pantelleria Vecchia Bank. In 2015, oceanographers were making a detailed map of the seafloor here, and at a depth of 40 meters, their instruments drew something strange. Lines that were too even, too straight. Geophysicists develop an eye for things like this. Nature does not like straight lines. Divers were sent down. On the sandy bottom lay a gigantic stone pillar, split into 2 pieces, limestone. Its total length was 12 meters, a 4-story building tipped onto its side. Its estimated weight was about 15 tons, 3 adult elephants. But it was not the size that astonished the divers. There were gaping holes in the stone, 3 of them. One went all the way through the entire thickness, a straight cylindrical channel that aligned perfectly in both halves of the split block, which means it had been drilled while the monolith was still whole. 2 smaller holes were on the sides, just as regular. Random erosion does not make channels like these. Hands made them. Oceanographer Emanuel Lodolo and geophysicist Zvi Ben Avraham, who led the study, were left alone with a question that makes the head spin. Who cut, moved, and erected a 15-ton column in the middle of what is now a sea strait, and when and why? The water itself suggested the answer. Today, the monolith lies under 40 meters of seawater, but it was not always like that. At the end of the last ice age, the level of the world ocean was tens of meters lower. Colossal masses of water remained locked in glaciers. Pantelleria Vecchia Bank was land back then, a chain of small islands and coastal shoals in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, and Mesolithic people, hunters and gatherers, could easily have lived along the shore. Then the glaciers melted, the sea rose, and around 9,500 to 10,000 years ago, it swallowed these lands forever. That means everything done to the stone was done before the flooding, around 10 millennia ago. Dating of shells from the rock itself produced a similar figure. The age of the find is around 9,500 years. This is where it is worth stopping and grasping the scale. Stonehenge is roughly half as old as this monolith. The pyramids of Giza are also roughly half as old. When nameless craftsmen were wrestling with this column, the invention of writing was still more than 5,000 years away. At the same time, for a long time, science regarded the Mesolithic people of the Mediterranean as simple wandering communities incapable of monumental construction. But cutting a 12-meter block out of a rock layer, separating it, moving it, and setting it in place is an engineering task. Calculation, organization, dozens of working hands, levers, rollers, ropes. In recent decades, however, archaeology has already grown used to surprises like this. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, archaeologists found a temple complex with carved stone pillars that is around 11,000 to 12,000 years old. It was built by hunters and gatherers before agriculture of any kind. The underwater monolith near Sicily belongs to the same class of discoveries. It shows that the primitive people of the Stone Age were far more capable than it is comfortable for us to think. What was it for? Lodolo and his colleagues cautiously suggest a navigational marker, a landmark for boats, a primitive lighthouse on a low shore, or perhaps a mooring stone. The through hole could have held a torch or a rope. People of that era were already traveling by sea, without maps, without instruments, by memory and by the stars. Naturally, some people also remembered Atlantis. The age and dimensions of the discovery seem almost deliberately tailored to the legend. They did not raise the monolith. It was too difficult and expensive. It still lies 40 meters beneath the keels of passing ships, overgrown with algae, with small fish hiding in its man-made holes. 10,000 years ago, there was a shoreline here. Fires burned, boats dried, names were spoken that we will never know. Then the water came, and an entire world of the Ice Age sank to the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. So far, we have found only one single stone from it. The road on the seafloor that was predicted 30 years before its discovery. September 1968, the Bahamas. Zoologist and experienced diver Joseph Manson Valentine glides above the turquoise shallows near the island of Bimini. The water here is so clear that the bottom can be read as though through glass, and at a depth of only 5 to 6 meters, he notices something that takes his breath away. Even rows of enormous flat blocks laid with astonishing regularity. The next day he returns with a mask and snorkel and confirms that he did not imagine it. Underwater lies a paved road. Today it is called the Bimini Road or the Bimini Wall. It is a chain of rectangular and polygonal limestone slabs laid one after another for 800 meters along the island's northern shore. The blocks average 2 to 3 meters in width, with some reaching 4 meters, and are about half a meter thick. Each weighs tons. Their edges have been rounded by time, and the slabs look as though they were fitted to one another, exactly like an ancient embankment, pier, or paved road that went underwater. Later, 2 smaller parallel lines were found nearby, each about 50 to 60 meters long, made of blocks 1 to 2 meters across, as though they were parts of a single complex. And now the detail that turned the discovery into a worldwide sensation. 30 years earlier, in 1938, the famous American clairvoyant Edgar Cayce, he was called the Sleeping Prophet because he delivered his predictions while in a trance, left, among other things, one unusually specific prophecy. Part of the temples of Atlantis would rise from beneath the water near Bimini in 1968 or 1969. Cayce died in 1945, and in 1968, a stone road was found near Bimini. The match was so exact that the island instantly became a place of pilgrimage for seekers of Atlantis, the same legendary land that, according to Plato, sank beneath the water in a single night. Supporters of the man-made explanation refuse to give up. The line is simply too straight, they reply, and the blocks are too similar. Random cracks do not behave like that. There were reports that something resembling supporting logs had been found beneath some of the slabs, but those finds never appeared in scientific journals. Researcher Gregory Little suggested that what we are looking at is a pier or breakwater from an ancient coastal settlement built in the 2nd millennium before the Common Era, when the sea stood slightly lower and these stones lay right at the water's edge. Official science votes for nature and politely calls Cayce's prophecy a coincidence, but every year people sail to Bimini, put on masks, lie on the water, and stare down for a long time at the even rows of stone slabs disappearing into the blue, and each person sees something different there. The monster that was caught and thrown back into the ocean. Dawn on April 25, 1977, the Japanese trawler Zuyo Maru is fishing for mackerel about 50 kilometers from Christchurch, New Zealand, an ordinary commercial voyage, with the nets lowered to 300 meters, down where permanent twilight already reigns. And suddenly the winches let out a strained howl. Something impossibly heavy was hanging in the trawl. When the load was raised to the side of the ship, the deck froze. Out of the foam appeared a carcass about 10 meters long and weighing almost 1,800 kilograms, as much as 2 passenger cars at once, a long neck 1.5 meters, 4 reddish fins that looked like flippers, a torn, broken tail, empty eye sockets, there were no eyes at all, and half of the lower jaw was missing. And the smell of decay was so powerful that it made the sailors retch. It did not look like a fish or a whale, at least not to people who had spent their entire lives at sea. Someone said aloud what everyone had been thinking: a plesiosaur. A marine reptile that, according to science, had gone extinct 65 million years ago. Extinct, and yet there it was, hanging from the crane boom and dripping onto the deck. Captain Akira Tanaka faced a choice that all of Japan would later argue about. The decomposing carcass, with all its bacteria, threatened to spoil the entire commercial catch, in other words, the crew's earnings. But if the nets really held a creature unknown to science, then he had the discovery of the century in his hands. Tanaka did not think for long, and yet the crew still managed to do the most important things. They photographed the carcass, measured it, and fisherman Mitsuhiko Yano cut pieces of tissue and horny fibers from a fin and placed them in brine. Later, from memory, he would draw a diagram of the creature, and that sketch would appear in newspapers everywhere. As a joke, the find was nicknamed Nessie after the Loch Ness Monster, and then they pushed it back overboard. The only physical evidence sank to the bottom. When the photographs reached Japan, what the press called plesiosaur fever began. The pictures were on front pages, and the creature received the name New Nessie, the New Nessie. The shipping company ordered all of its trawlers to search for the discarded carcass, without success. prominent scientists appeared on television. Yoshinori Imaizumi of the National Science Museum in Tokyo stated that the photographs showed neither a fish nor a mammal, but almost certainly a giant marine reptile. Professor Tokyo Shikama of Yokohama University agreed. It looked very much like a plesiosaur. In July 1977, a press conference was convened, solemnly for the whole world, even though the tissue analyses were not even ready yet. T-shirts and figurines appeared in stores. The British Nessie, the Japanese rejoiced, had found a Pacific relative. Outside Japan, however, people were skeptical. Western biologists reminded everyone that strange carcasses had been mistaken for prehistoric monsters before, and that the basking shark has a grim post-mortem trick. As it decomposes, it first loses its gills, the lower part of its head, and its dorsal and tail fins, and its silhouette turns into a long-necked creature with a small head, exactly like a plesiosaur. The final word came from those very pieces of tissue preserved in brine. Japanese laboratories subjected them to a detailed biochemical analysis, comparing their amino acid composition with known species. And on July 25, 1977, they announced the verdict. The tissues contained elastoidin, a protein found only in shark fins. No bones, which a reptile would necessarily have, were found at all. The plesiosaur turned out to be the bloated carcass of a basking shark, the second largest fish on the planet, but the legend refused to die. The excitement was so intense that in November 1977, Japan issued a commemorative stamp in honor of the discovery, while lovers of the unexplained began talking about a conspiracy among scientists. All that remained of the monster were 5 photographs, a sketch drawn from memory, and a handful of fibers in brine, and the photograph of the carcass hanging from the crane. It still sends a chill down the spine of anyone who does not know how this story ended. The computer that lay on the seafloor for 20 centuries. Autumn of 1900, the Aegean Sea. Sponge divers from the Greek island of Symi are waiting out bad weather by the rocks of the tiny island of Antikythera between Kythera and Crete. So that the day will not be wasted, Captain Dimitrios Kondos sends a diver down to inspect the bottom. A few minutes later, the diver shoots back to the surface like a cork and, gasping for breath, shouts, "There are bodies below!" Piles of dead people and horses scattered across the bottom. Kondos decides to look for himself. He puts on a diving suit, descends to 45 meters, and returns clutching a bronze human arm. Not from a corpse, from a statue. The bodies turned out to be sculptures. The bottom was covered with wreckage from an ancient Roman ship loaded with works of art. In the spring of 1901, salvage work began, suicidally dangerous by the standards of the era. Divers in copper helmets descended again and again to a depth where decompression sickness maims and kills. The work cost one diver his life, and 2 more were paralyzed. But treasures began coming to the surface. Magnificent bronze and marble statues, amphorae, jewelry, painted vessels, coins, and along with them, pieces of rotten wood and a shapeless lump of bronze eaten by corrosion, which was unceremoniously put into storage at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. No one looked at it twice. On May 17, 1902, archaeologist Valerios Stias was sorting through finds from the Antikythera ship and paused over this greenish-gray lump that looked like a stone. By then, the lump had cracked, and in the fracture gleamed something that could not possibly be there: a bronze-toothed wheel, a gear with neatly cut teeth, inside an object more than 2,000 years old. Stias proposed the unbelievable. He was looking at an ancient astronomical clock. His colleague shrugged. Antiquity, it was believed, could not have known mechanisms of such complexity. The solution stretched across decades. In the 1950s through the 1970s, British physicist Derek de Solla Price X-rayed the fragments and for the first time saw the internal structure. Later studies, including 3-dimensional tomography in 2005, confirmed his conclusions and even revealed inscriptions invisible to the naked eye. Today, this object is known as the Antikythera mechanism, the oldest analog computer in human history. It was built by Greek craftsmen in the 2nd to 1st century before the Common Era. A wooden case the size of a shoebox, 34 by 18 by 9 centimeters. Inside were at least 30 bronze gears cut by hand. 82 fragments have survived to our time, and only 7 contain mechanics or readable inscriptions, but even that was enough to reconstruct the device as a whole. Turn the side crank and the pointers show the position of the sun and moon in the zodiac. A 2-colored sphere rotates, reproducing the phases of the moon. A wheel with 223 teeth counts out the Saros, an 18-year cycle on which eclipses repeat. The mechanism predicted them in advance, and the inscriptions apparently even specified details of the future eclipse. A separate scale tracked the 19-year calendar cycle, another tracked the 4-year cycle of the Pan-Hellenic Games, including the Olympics. A calendar, an observatory, and a sports schedule in a single box. More than that, a clever pin and slot pair made the lunar pointer alternately speed up and slow down. The craftsman reproduced in bronze the uneven motion of the moon along its orbit. Europe would create nothing comparable in precision for another 16 centuries, until the astronomical clocks of the late Middle Ages. The deciphered text on the plates turned out to be a condensed user manual, what each scale shows. Cicero wrote that Archimedes and other sages built spheres that reproduced the motion of the heavens. After Antikythera, those lines read very differently. Perhaps the mechanism came from the school of Posidonius on Rhodes, from the tradition of the great astronomer Hipparchus, and was traveling to Italy on a Roman ship as a trophy or in order for a noble aristocrat. Around the 70th to 60th year before the Common Era, the vessel was caught in a storm and sank together with statues, gold, and the most valuable cargo on board, which no one at the time even knew was there. Think about the gap. The first half of the 1st century before the Common Era, the age of Julius Caesar, wooden carts and sailing galleys, and in that same age, someone hand-cut dozens of bronze gears with an exact number of teeth so that a box small enough to carry could predict eclipses years in advance. The world would not see mechanisms of comparable complexity for another roughly 1,500 years, until Europe's cathedral astronomical clocks. 1,500 years of absence, as though knowledge flared up and went dark. Today, enthusiasts build working copies of the mechanism, whether from brass or from the parts of a children's construction set, and the original lies in a display case in an Athens museum and asks a question with no answer. Machines like this are not born as one-of-a-kind objects. Where are the others? Most likely they were melted down, lost, or dissolved by seawater. We learned about the genius of ancient engineers by pure chance, because one day a storm drove sponge divers to the wrong island, and one terrified diver mistook bronze for corpses. The disc on the bottom of the Baltic that made equipment fail nearby. The summer of 2011, the Swedish team Ocean X, professional shipwreck hunters Peter Lindberg and Dennis Osberg, is scanning the seabed between Sweden and Finland with sonar. These are not romantics with a metal detector. In the late 1990s, this same team raised a cargo of champagne from the Baltic seabed from a ship torpedoed during the First World War. The bottles sold at auction for fabulous sums of money. Now they are looking for another vessel with valuable cargo. Instead, they find something they have been unable to explain for 15 years. On the side-scan sonar screen, at a depth of 91 meters, the height of a 30-story building, something appears. A rounded object about 60 meters in diameter, the size of a hockey rink, with clear, almost symmetrical contours. And behind it is a smooth strip of disturbed seabed nearly 300 meters long, as though the object had been braking, as though it had dragged itself along the bottom and stopped. The grainy black and white image leaked to the press, and the comparison came instantly. The Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. The resemblance really was unsettling. The find was dubbed the Baltic Sea anomaly, and theories began pouring in, each bolder than the last. Lindberg and Osberg went down to the object themselves. Visibility was almost zero, the water dark and icy. Out of the darkness emerged a stepped stone mass rising 3 to 4 meters above the bottom. Rounded edges, a surface that in places looked suspiciously smooth, straight faces, angles close to 90 degrees. The divers described something like steps or terraces leading toward the top, exactly like the ruins of a sunken structure. And then came the oddities that the team still talks about today. Near the object, they say, electronics malfunctioned. Cameras shut down. The satellite phone went dead. The sonar itself acted up. Move farther away, and everything came back to life. The internet offered explanations for every taste. A secret object from the Second World War. The Baltic was a theater of naval operations, and all kinds of things still lie on its bottom. An alien spacecraft that crashed into the sea thousands of years ago and became embedded in the sediment. A structure built by people of the Ice Age. Geologists urged everyone to breathe. Glaciers plowed across the floor of the Baltic, and bizarre rock formations here are more the rule than the exception. The human brain has a built-in habit. It looks for familiar shapes in chaos, the same habit that makes us see faces in electric electrical outlets and animals in clouds. Psychologists call it pareidolia. Give a person a blurry round spot on a gray background and they will almost certainly complete it into something man-made in their mind, especially if someone nearby has already said the word ship. The answer took several years. The team chipped rock samples from the anomaly itself and from around it and handed them to independent experts. The verdict of Professor Volker Bruckert of Stockholm University sounded mercilessly ordinary. Granite, gneiss, sandstone, a classic collection of rocks carried along by a glacier. One sample contained basalt, volcanic rock that should have no source in the non-volcanic Baltic, except beneath an ice sheet that hauled it hundreds of kilometers during the Ice Age. The entire structure is a giant moraine, a pile of boulders dropped by a melting glacier thousands of years ago and shaped by water. And the perfect saucer on sonar is an imaging artifact. The resolution was low, the contours were blurred, and the human brain itself completed the spot into a familiar silhouette. For science, the case is closed, and it is closed in the dullest possible way, but a lingering feeling remained. Besides, an entire industry quickly grew around the discovery. Documentaries were filmed, t-shirts and souvenirs were sold, and there was talk of paid expeditions to the Baltic UFO. When money is at stake, a mystery gains a reason not to be solved too quickly. 50 tiny spheres that came from another star system. The night of January 8, 2014, above Manus Island in Papua New Guinea, a fireball cuts across the sky and, breaking apart, fades over the Bismarck Sea. It was an ordinary event. Meteors burn up over the ocean every night, and no one paid attention to this one. No one except American military sensors, which unemotionally recorded its speed and trajectory. Years later, Harvard astronomers led by Professor Avi Loeb obtained those records. The numbers stunned them. The fireball entered the atmosphere at a speed of about 45 kilometers per second, too fast for an object bound to the sun. It was not orbiting our star. It had come from outside, from interstellar space. And in 2022, the United States Space Command officially confirmed the accuracy of the measurements. The object was designated IM-1, potentially the first interstellar meteor ever recorded by humanity, and its fragments were lying at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. It is worth explaining who Avi Loeb is. He is not some fringe figure working out of a basement, but one of the most cited astrophysicists on the planet and the longtime chair of Harvard's astronomy department. Several years earlier, he was the one who loudly suggested that the strange interstellar object Oumuamua, which passed through our system in 2017, might have been not a rock, but a fragment of alien technology. His colleagues rolled their eyes at the time. Loeb is a man who is not afraid to say out loud what others are afraid even to think. In the summer of 2023, Loeb organized the Galileo expedition. The idea sounded like pure madness, to find grains of a burned-up celestial body on the ocean floor. A needle in a haystack would actually be a compliment. The depth was around 2 kilometers, and the impact area was 85 kilometers north of Papua New Guinea. Calculations saved them. Military radar data and dispersion models narrowed the search zone down to several square kilometers. And across this patch from the deck of the vessel's Silver Star, they dragged a sled fitted with a powerful magnet for 2 weeks straight, combing the seafloor like a giant comb. On June 20th, 2023, during yet another inspection of the magnet, someone spotted tiny glittering points in the sediment stuck to it. Under a microscope, they became perfect metallic spheres less than a millimeter across, dark gold in color, with polished surfaces the size of grains of sand. Altogether, they collected around 50. Some hit a surprise. Smaller spheres sat inside them like microscopic nesting dolls. Droplets of molten metal had frozen in flight, trapping other droplets inside themselves. Loeb himself described the moment simply: "It is like spotting an ant in your kitchen. If you have found one, there will be others." The very first analysis with an X-ray fluorescence spectrometer added fuel to the fire. The composition: iron, about 8% silicon, 4% magnesium, 2% titanium, and almost no nickel at all. To a specialist, that is a false note. Ordinary iron meteorites always contain nickel. It is their calling card, their signature. It is also common in industrial alloys made by humans. But here there was iron without nickel, with a strange titanium impurity, a signature that does not exist in the catalogs. The samples were packed up and sent to laboratories for isotopic analysis, the only thing capable of proving interstellar origin without qualifications. Meanwhile, Loeb voiced a scenario for which his colleagues criticize him mercilessly. What if these are not fragments of rock, but fragments of something manufactured? Say, the outer shell of a probe that drifted between stars for entire ages and ended its journey in Earth's ocean. Let us be honest, most scientists are skeptical. The spheres could turn out to be ordinary cosmic dust, traces of completely terrestrial processes, or something else, and the dispute is far from settled. But even skeptics acknowledge the main point. Until now, humanity had held only matter from our own solar system in its hands. Any confirmed interstellar grain would be a soil sample from another world delivered to us for free, and the main prize is still down there. Calculations allow for the possibility that a larger fragment of IM once survived, a piece that could be raised, held in the hands and examined. Is it a rock or a component? It lies somewhere in the black water at a depth of 2 kilometers. Perhaps that time the magnet missed it by only a couple of meters. The golden egg from a depth of 3 kilometers, 3,300 meters underwater. That is 10 Eiffel Towers stacked on top of one another, and pressure under which more than 300 kilograms bear down on every square centimeter, as though an adult horse were placed on an area the size of a postage stamp. The Gulf of Alaska, eternal darkness, water only slightly warmer than zero. A patch of light slowly crawls along the slope of an underwater mountain. The deep-sea vehicle of the American NOAA expedition, Seascape Alaska 5, has been methodically filming the bottom for hours, and the view is always the same: gray silt, rocks, rare starfish, and suddenly a golden glint. The operator stops the robot. The camera moves closer. On a brown rock sits a smooth dome of honey gold color, about 10 centimeters across, the size of a small grapefruit. Its surface is matte, even, and most of all resembles skin. Not metal, not stone, the skin of a living creature. In shape, the find resembles a slumped hat pressed tightly against the rock, and in the floodlights it gives off a dull gleam, as though someone had dropped a gold bar onto the seafloor. All of this was happening live. The expedition was streaming the dive on the internet, and thousands of people around the world were seeing exactly the same thing as the scientists on board the vessel. And the scientists were silent. Finally, one of the researchers nervously said the phrase that immediately spread across the internet. "This looks like the beginning of a horror movie." He meant one detail that really was unsettling. At the base of the dome was a dark opening, neat, almost perfectly round, as though it had been cut, as though something had made it from the inside and crawled out. Or the other way around, something had found a way in. They touched the object with the manipulator, carefully, like bomb technicians. The surface turned out to be delicate like silk, thin like a membrane, and slightly sticky against the rock. Under gentle pressure, the dome gave way and separated from the seabed. It was carefully sucked by a pump into a transparent container and carried upward. The ascent from such a depth takes hours. On deck, specialists wearing gloves examined the catch, which had already been nicknamed the golden egg. Soft but elastic, flexible but strong, like an empty shell that had contained something, or was supposed to contain something. No eyes, no mouth, no scenes, no distinguishable structures of any kind, nothing at all for a biologist's eye to catch on. Hence the main theory, which sounds ordinary and frightening at the same time. An egg, the shell of a giant egg from an unknown creature. There is one problem. None of the specialists on board, and these are people who devoted their entire lives to deep-sea biology, had ever seen anything like it. Not among octopuses, not among rays, not among sea snails, whose egg masses are very well known to science. Sam Cambio of NOAA Ocean Exploration summed it up more honestly than anyone. As frustrating as it is to be stumped by a 10-centimeter ball, it is an excellent reminder of just how poorly we know our own planet and how much the ocean still keeps to itself. And he was not exaggerating. Less than a quarter of the ocean floor has been mapped in detail. Humanity has studied the terrain of Mars better than what lies beneath the hulls of its own ships. The sample was sent to a laboratory for genetic analysis. The working theories are these: the egg capsule of an unknown marine species, the remains of a sponge not yet described by science, or a third possibility that does not even have a name yet. The public never received a definitive answer, and there is nothing surprising about that. Every second or third animal that expeditions like this bring up from great depth is being seen by science for the first time. Every dive brings creatures that do not yet have a name. The Golden Dome is simply the most photogenic of them, and here is the thought that makes it hard to sleep. If this really is an egg, then somewhere out there, in the black water of the Gulf of Alaska, lives the creature that laid it, a creature that no human being on Earth has ever seen, and judging by the neat hole in the shell, the hatchling has already emerged. And it too is swimming somewhere down below. Be sure to write in the comments what you think about all of this, and right now, subscribe to the Top Facts channel for collections of the most incredible facts and videos from all over the internet. And right now, watch our previous episodes which have already appeared on your screen. Thank you for watching.